When it comes to race issues in the United States, I think we can all safely agree that Pete Buttigieg is trash at them. So the Democrats recently had their 8th primary debate in New Hampshire when Mayor Pete was asked a question about the increased rate of marijuana-related arrests for black individuals during his tenure as mayor in South Bend, Indiana. Now, in typical Pete fashion, he didn't answer the question at first. Props to the moderator for pressing him on this issue and actually getting him to double down on his word salad where he doesn't actually say anything at all. So let's watch this clip of Mayor Pete dodging another race question and then discuss.
I want to turn now to criminal justice. Mayor Buttigieg, under your leadership as mayor, a black resident in South Bend, Indiana, was 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white resident. Now, that racial disparity is higher than the rest of the state. In fact, it's higher than the rest of the nation, and that disparity increased in South Bend after you took office. When talking about the problem on national terms, you've called it, quote, evidence of systemic racism. But you were mayor for 8 years, so weren't you, in effect, the head of the system? And how do you explain that increase in black arrests under your leadership?
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average, and specifically to marijuana, lower than in Indiana. But there is no question that systemic racism has penetrated to every level of our system, and my city was not immune. I took a lot of heat for discussing systemic racism with my own police department. But we've got to confront the fact that there is no escaping how this is part of all of our policies. Earlier, we were talking about opioids, and thankfully, America has come to a better understanding about the fact that opioid addiction is best understood as a medical problem. But there were a lot of people, including a lot of African-American activists in my community, who have made the very good point. It's great that everybody's so enlightened about drug policy now when it comes to opioids, but where were you when it came to marijuana? Where were you when it came to the crack epidemic in the 1990s? That is one of the reasons why I am calling for us as a country to take up those reforms that end incarceration as a response to possession and make sure that we legalize marijuana, and when we do it retroactively with expungements to correct the harm done in so many cases of incarceration, disproportionately of black and brown Americans, where the incarceration did far more harm than the offense it was intended to deal with.
I want to go back to the original question, though. How do you explain the increase in black arrests in South Bend under your leadership for marijuana possession?
And again, the overall rate was lower.
No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower. Once you became in office in 2012, that number went up. In 2018, the last year that we have a record for, that number was still up.
Yep. And one of the strategies that our community adopted was to target when there were cases where there was gun violence and gang violence, which was slaughtering so many in our community. Burying teenagers, disproportionately black teenagers. We adopted a strategy that said that drug enforcement would be targeted in cases where there was a connection to the most violent group or gang connected to a murder. These things are all connected, but that's the point. So are all of the things that need to change in order for us to prevent violence and remove the effects of systemic racism, not just from criminal justice, but from our economy, from health, from housing, and from our democracy itself.
That answer was horrible. That answer was beyond atrocious. And this is something that he prepared. Everything that comes out of Mayor Pete's mouth is scripted. It's prepared. He thinks of this beforehand, so he has the answer when he gets asked the question. And this is the best that he could come up with. First of all, he's up there on stage lying to you. He's lying to you. The question was twofold. Why did rates of arrest rise during his tenure as South Bend mayor? And also, why were the rates of arrest higher than the national average? He goes on to say that they were lower than the national average. Well, he's only telling a half-truth there. So, as Intercept reports here, A black South Bend resident under the Buttigieg administration was 4.3 times more likely to be arrested for possessing marijuana between 2012 and 2018 than a white resident, according to data collected by the federal government. Meanwhile, in Indiana statewide during that time, according to data from reporting law enforcement agencies, black people were 3.5 times more at risk of a pot arrest. Nationally, the disparity between the rates of black arrests and white arrests was 3-1. Later on, they go on to say, in 2018, 714 people were arrested for all drug-related offenses. Despite making up just a quarter of the population, more than half, 384, were black. While overall, South Bend was worse than both Indiana and the country as a whole, there were some individual years during which the arrest rates for black people in South Bend were lower than the statewide average. So, in that last paragraph, I'd like to put emphasis on something. Some of those years. The way Pete Buttigieg is framing that in his response is as if all of the years during his tenure, it was lower than the national and state averages. That's not true. That's a lie, and he's lying on stage. Another point that I want to make is that the arrest rates can go up while also being lower than the national average. The two of those aren't mutually exclusive, and the thing is, Mayor Pete knows this. Mayor Pete is a McKinley guy, okay? Mayor Pete is a Rhodes Scholar, which he likes to brag about all the time. And he knows better. The thing is, he knows that the two are mutually exclusive, and yet he's on there, on stage, in front of everyone, lying to you. Mayor Pete doesn't care. He does not care at all about rates of arrest or among black individuals. And in that segment, you could tell. And the one way you can tell is that after being asked that question, he doesn't comment on this at all. He doesn't decide to hop in. He doesn't wave his hand so he could get called on again so he can make another comment about these systemic inequalities. He just stays silent from that point on until the next topic is spoken on. He does not care. The fact of the matter is he does not care. Another point that I thought was interesting in the video is that Mayor Pete is essentially the reasoning that he says that the rates are higher than the national average, or whatever excuse he wants to give, is because these arrests were related to violent crimes. He invokes black deaths in order to make his point, which I think is absolutely disgusting, since he clearly doesn't care about them in the first place. But his reasoning is that these were related to gangs. These were related to weapon arrests. And because they also had marijuana on them at the time, that they're linked. Essentially, his excuse boils down to black people were committing more crimes, and that's why the rates are higher. That is a white supremacist talking point. He's up on the national stage parroting white supremacist talking points that black people just commit more crimes, and that's why the rates are higher than the national average and the state average. That's disgusting. That to me is so appalling that he's up there on stage invoking the deaths of black individuals while saying, the rates are higher because they were committing more crimes. Another point that I want to make about his response is that at one point he says something along the lines of, I got some heat for discussing systematic racism with my police force. That's something you're supposed to do. I don't know how he finds a way to try to make himself a victim in all of this. I don't know why he's trying to make himself out to be a martyr, but that's something you're supposed to do, Pete. You're supposed to make sure that your police force isn't being systemically oppressive to minorities. That's something you're supposed to do. We don't care that you caught heat for it. Do your job. That's something you're supposed to do as mayor, is make sure that if your police force is being racist, you make them fall in line. Someone like that does not deserve to represent the United States. And when you have Mayor Pete out here a few years ago after Eric Gardner's death saying, all lives matter, someone that says all lives matter, to me, in conjunction with what he just said there on stage, is not fit to serve. This is absolutely disgusting, absolutely appalling, and I wish someone on stage would have called him out for parroting these white supremacist talking points. I think Liz did a good job in saying that his response was inadequate, but man, that was just disgusting to see, disgusting to watch, and it's no wonder why he's polling 0% among black individuals nationally.